I'm Matthew Dirst, and I'm the Artistic Director of Ars Lyrica Houston.
I'm Antoine Plante, and I'm the Artistic Director of Mercury Chamber Orchestra.
And I'm Rick Erickson, and I'm the Director of the Bach Society Houston.
I'm thrilled that you all could make this time for today. We've been really focused, as I know you all have, on how do we reinvent and stay relevant within our community as we move ahead in this uncertain time.
It seemed that a conversation like this as part of our Concerts and Conversations segments on Friday mornings would make sense, since we've been collaborating with these organizations for years, trying to stay out of each other's way in terms of scheduling from season to season, because we share a certain number of subscribers and patrons, working on the joint Houston Early Music Festival now for, I've lost track how many seasons. So we wanted to reach out to our closest partner organizations, both Bach Society Houston and Mercury, in order to check in with the artistic directors of both, Antoine Plante and Rick Erickson, and to have a little conversation and maybe look at some musical clips as we talk about and consider where we're at and where we might be going in the next several months and even years.
Well, first of all, I'd like to open it up to discussion and just ask all of you, how are you doing?
Nothing that original on my side. I mean, I think that it's been going for a little while now. At first, it was kind of interesting to have much more time than we thought we would we would have in a way. It was like, wow, this is something chaotic, something different. We're really sad about canceling everything, then started worry about, of course, about what it means for the organizations, and a lot as far as the musician goes as well. And then, kind of a personal level, you're like, well, now I have time now to do all these things that I never have time to do, which turned out being really untrue. So all these books that I wanted to read for years, and I thought, well, now no concerts for weeks, perhaps months, but at the end of the day, then it kind of takes us on the business side is, what do we do? Starting editing, starting finding things to still connecting with people, and connecting with people, with musicians, patrons, board members, perhaps in even more intense way than usual, to see what, to make sure everybody is safe, but also to these are people that we usually see every other week or so. So there's that. And then on the personal side, with the whole thing of both my wife and I working from home and having to start homeschooling with 3 kids. So it's been an interesting, somewhat fascinating thing to live through.
Thank you, Antoine, for that, and thank you for hosting this conversation. I think it's really a wonderful idea, so I'm glad to be part of this conversation. I think, like all of us, at the beginning, it felt like the unreal possibility that this was occurring. And I think it's been heartbreaking to have to set aside performances and to not be able to see in person people that we enjoy making music with and whom we have close relationships, our boards, our supporters. We were going to be heading to Germany in less than 2 weeks, and so it's heartbreaking that that's all been set aside. It's rather amazing to watch this worldwide phenomena of event after event let go of. People's plans changing so radically. I agree with Antoine too. I had thought that I'd get a lot more practice in. That hasn't happened. I wish that I had invested in Zoom in about February. That would have been a good thing for the organization, quite frankly. And although I'm so tremendously challenged online, I think for Bach Society, we just did our first video performance broadcast, and I feel like maybe we've moved maybe 50 or 60 years into the future. This has finally forced our hands in needing to take on the world of video. So there are some exciting new possibilities. There are some exciting new aspects. There are also many, many challenges, and I think especially for our organization about the difficulties and challenges and perhaps proscriptions against singing together, and the whole business of what's exactly is happening when someone sings, and what are the real implications of this. So that is certainly one aspect that weighs heavily on my mind as we look into the year ahead and perhaps longer.
We have had to cancel programs as well. That seems to be a universal response among arts organizations. So a number of programs either have been postponed for 6 months to a year, or others just canceled outright. In the case of our season finale, it was replaced by a virtual event that we put together last week on Bach's Phoebus and Pan. Otherwise, the staff and I have been working to create virtual content on several different in several different kinds of contexts. And that's actually been a lot of fun and an interesting learning experience for me. I've discovered that, for example, when I sit down to play something for a virtual broadcast and we're taping it, either I'm doing it on my iPad or Kathleen's doing it on her video camera, I've gotten a lot more used to getting things right on the first take because you don't want to have to be involved for hours and hours to make it work that way, especially not when you're with somebody else in the same room and trying to get something done in a hurry for obvious reasons right now. So there's been a few interesting adjustments, and I think that we've collectively, I'm speaking now for Ars Lyrica, learned a lot about how to deliver virtual content that will probably keep going in the future as a way to inform our audience about upcoming programs, or a way to tie together strands in the season, or a way to make connections around the globe with other people. So it's not been a completely bad thing. There are a few small silver linings in all of this, and I'm trying to stay focused on that while I do some of my own work.
Matthew, I love your comment about doing it the first time, making it count on videoing. I'm very aware that I have to be much more accepting. You don't make mistakes, but I have to be much more accepting of the fact that I'm going to miss a note here and there, and that's going to have to be fine, and that actually the video language is actually more a living, live event than something which is maybe a preparation for a CD. So I would agree with you, and I've had to really rethink that process. And maybe that's a healthy thing in that context.
I think ultimately it's liberating, because when we make proper recordings, we're always depending upon an engineer and a producer to scrub away all of our problems and mistakes.
Exactly.
That kind of intense focus and the kind of shifted mindset that's required has been an interesting period of discovery.
And I think that's important for our audiences also to see, because, I mean, if you think back to when you were a student and you listen to these CDs and that aspiration to perfection, it's like Cosmopolitan, right? You think you're supposed to look a certain way, and this idea that imperfection is very much part of it, and that in order to take the risks that you want to take musically in a live performance, it's a scary thing to do. So how do you meld that risk taking and that ultimate music making experience with a desire for something good enough to still be on YouTube in 10 years?
Yeah. Well, it's also true that occasionally in life one hears a CD performance and you are very excited, but then you hear that same individual or group live and you realize, oh, these are two very different worlds here, and that's part of the reality. So this is an interesting time for us.
We started live streaming all of our subscription programs several years ago, and that did kind of it forced a different mindset for a lot of us who climb on the stage and realize that it's being filmed. But it seems to me that the more recent emphasis on nothing but virtual programming has kind of amped up that calculus to a different degree now, because of course all of the performance is going out this way, and none of it's actually in front of an audience. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the main consumption, or I guess perhaps the main opportunity of consumption of these things is a different approach. Is people, if it goes on a feed of social media, you have perhaps 2 minutes. If you're lucky, most of the time about 15 seconds. And so, I mean, we've been kind of working to that, so that, and you know, that's the reality. I mean, I'm not even commenting of the good or bad of it. It's just a reality that most of the time people will not listen to a 45-minute concert if it's out of this platform. And so it really changes to the way that we choose what we put out there and how we put it. I think that if we are doing a 2-minute clip, I think it's important for it to be it's close to the approach of a CD thing, where you have 2 minutes to just say something, and hopefully it's going to be there, but it needs to be really good. So that's been a really interesting things, and that's where I bet all of us spend quite a bit of time the last 2 months try to figure this out. One of the most beautiful thing about it is, you put a concert at Zilka Hall, or in the beautiful your beautiful church, or even in downtown, and you have 1,000 people in our hall, the maximum that can come, and you post a video on the social media, and in 2 days you reach 4,000 people, 5,000 people. So there's something really powerful about that really goes along all our missions.
One other thought on this subject, it may be that as we go back to the hall, whenever that is, and start doing programs again, that we need to keep going, not just with those full-length programs, but also with that 2 minutes of perfection that Antoine mentioned, that gets circulated on social media, because I think we're developing a couple of different kinds of audiences here. One that consumes music and culture in general in very short bits through social media, and another that's actually willing to engage for an entire program, whether that be live streamed or in person.
I think, just a quick response, I think that for us, being able to broadcast is something which is new for us, but I think is here to stay. And whatever happens in the future, even if we are able to move back into various houses, and certainly we all want that, I think that this is a new dimension that is now part of our lives, and and maybe it's very healthy. Maybe it's another silver lining that we didn't expect.
I think it's really important, actually. I mean, I think it's ironic in some ways that the people at this roundtable are all about historical performance and looking backwards, and that all three of you are being forced to actually look very much forwards as to how do we keep this relevant and in front of people. I mean, the Bach Society is doing work that very few people across the country are doing, and I feel like it's a shame that it's limited only to the Houston audiences that are following you. So I hope that this will create more audience for you.
Absolutely. We thank you. We kind of look at it the same way and hope for the same things. I think that, well, even if this pandemic hadn't come, we were actually going to take a videographer with us this time around on tour to Germany. So that would have already begun this process fully. Once again, we'll accept a difficulty as a gift.
Why do you feel, if you do, that the Houston landscape is uniquely prepared for this? When we look back in history, the arts have been challenged by all kinds of needs to innovate, whether it was simply innovations of instruments for concert halls, and we have, the Capard seat for understanding the evolution of instruments as historical preservationists, or whether it was history or whatever it was that caused innovation. Innovation is just part of the game in the arts. And then in Houston, of course, itself, the things that we've had to overcome economically, ecologically, with things that have gotten in the way of our performances. So the first part is overcoming. And then the second part is the idea that in order to change, it is very difficult to deconstruct what you've been doing. So think about what a gift it is that things have been sort of leveled for us across the board. And then how can we, like we have so many times before, rise to the challenges of the current surroundings?
I agree with everything you just said. Houston has been uniquely challenged, at least in the last 10 or 20 years since I've been here, by a number of disasters, a couple of hurricanes that changed our lives more or less completely. Some people for months, even years, others for just a few days. But those hurricane events were profound for the local ecosystem, particularly for the cultural sphere, just because it rendered so many of our spaces unusable for a long time. We rose to the challenge locally, made do with other settings, and in some cases benefited from those adjustments and those relocations. I think the principal challenge going forward for us is not just going to be what can we do in our respective venues and with our respective audiences, but what kind of shape is the Houston economy going to be in 6 months or a year?
We're dealing with two problems. One problem is, can we perform? And how can we perform if we can? Let's say that it's allowed, but we have these restrictions where there's almost nobody, you know, in a 1,000 seat, there's 250 people perhaps allowed in. And if so, you know, is that an experience that we want to go forward with just by itself? You know, that's music is performing live is about connection. And when you create all sorts of rules to kind of make the connections harder, which is what it is, then a lot of performance aspect is challenged. That at Mercury, you know, there's two things that we go with. One of them is for next season, kind of two main guidelines is we want to be performing. However it is, we want to not just do things in our living room. We need to be kind of aggressive into we'll get together and perform. And the other thing is, you know, we'll just keep all the videographing or the streaming around, so that people that are part of our family but are not willing to take some more risks, that's at the end of the day, that's going to be it, are being able to be part of our family still. We all been really active. I think it's not necessarily the case in all communities. And that's one thing about Houston. There's a lot of us. There's a lot of you know, there's 3 of us just right now, which are really interested in performance practice, classical music, and we all just want to be there for our patrons. And so there is, you know, a dynamism that, and there's so many more of people like us. There's a dynamism in the city, from both the organizational, but also an openness from the musicians too. Are willing to just go for it and be out there as in streaming past performance. And it's not as easy in everywhere in the world to be able to what we've been able to do.
In terms of the civic energy, and certainly one of the things I was very aware of when I first moved here was that this was a very different scene than the one I had been used to prior to moving here. A much warmer, collegial, can-do attitude, which I think is really a hallmark of Houston. Is something that I enjoy very much. Harvey certainly immediately presented massive challenges of very different sort. Certainly people rightly diverted funding very quickly to help their neighbor and to support people who really were in a desperate way. And for a period of, at least for us, a period of months, there was very little patron support because people were simply making sure everything happened everywhere else. But then folks stepped up to the bar and solved that issue. So it's certainly, as we look toward this next season and time ahead, completely, as I'm sure each of Matthew and Antoine have been working on, we've drastically shifted the programming from what we first intended earlier in the year, and at this point we'll be taking a remarkably different path than I think we had originally imagined. Now, how, in the midst of that, then how do we do creative programming and keep the essence of who we are in that? And how also do we keep a commitment and a responsibility and a love of our artists and a desire to continue their musical expression? So maybe it's thinking of more intimate events and moments that can come together in some ways that we maybe haven't conceived of in the same way before.
You hit on something that I've recently been exploring in other webinars, which is basically we're all having an identity crisis as organizations. And so how do we responsibly deliver on our mission and our intent while keeping our artists and our audience at the forefront of our care without losing ourselves in the process? So that identity crisis is also reflected in technology as we invite our audiences online, which has its own impediments, as we ask our audiences and our artists to get online. And how do we change that process? So the question I pose to you then is, how do we keep our identity and our missions intact as we try to evolve? Do you have any thoughts on that, Matthew?
It may involve a little bit of creative, a few creative leaps. For example, programming solo recitals, chamber programs, more of them than you might. But right now, it's I think up to every organization to look carefully at its mission, its activities, determine what works best and what makes the most sense for them. And we may see a wide variety of different responses.
Also, kind of a mixture of all those things as we move forward. And for an optimistic note, I think we're also planning. Okay, if we get the go-ahead, are we ready to adjust the programming into a little bit larger scale than we had originally conceived as we're looking into this coming? So the flexibility in my mind is both as we maybe do some more intimate programming, but also be ready to move the other direction. So.
And if we have to defer some programs till the next season, so be it. I've already seriously contemplated calling next season Unfinished Business.
We have one program we know what we're doing, which is Bach at Home. It seems to be the right thing for next season. So we're going to focus, we're going to do one program just focusing on the Anna Magdalena notebook. And we're just going to go, we're going to be in quarantine with the Bach family, basically, for that performance. It seemed natural.
Yeah, and maybe I can add something on this. You know, one thing that that is interesting in our situation, all of three of us, in comparison to larger arts organization, is we have quite a bit of flexibility, and in a way it makes it scarier. And you can, you could lose your identity. You know, I think we all went into. But if we can't perform live, are we turning ourselves in the media business? Are we producing documentaries? Are we becoming actors and animators of Zoom meeting, like you're becoming yourself, Kathleen? And so are we reaching out to radio station and we just change, we are not a live performing organization again. And, it can be attractive, frankly. But we're trying not to lose. I think at the end of the day, we're still probably looking into something that will get resolved. And we have these great flexibilities with the way that with our models are in a way similar, where we can perhaps Matthew and I can play with venues more than you can, Rick, but we can definitely play with programming and with the size of orchestra. Things are moving pretty quickly, and we all want to kind of resolve things so that we know what we're doing. Usually we do that a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. We know for a year and a half ago what we're doing in September, and now we are in May and we don't know. And so it's not we're not used to that. So I'm tempted to take a decision today for what's going to happen next season. It's going to be this and that. And then let's say that in December, things really are back to it, and the opera and the ballet and the symphony is all back in their house, thousands of people. And here we are performing in a really different thing that what we used to be. So there's a little worry about that, as it's just part of the difficult decision making that we have to go through.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why, for me, it's important that we conceive of, if the green light comes, that we're also ready for that. So you're looking at various possibilities as it evolves.
It also makes me wonder whether anyone will actually give us a clear green light. It's complicated.
Yep.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, especially because of where we are, it is likely that the guidelines will relax more than what the people will be willing to do. So it's one thing to say you can gather with 1,000 people, which is what I guess perhaps I read that Germany or Italy just said that yesterday in some locality. It's something else for people to actually want to do that. And I think that's where I don't think we'll be there in the fall, but it's just right now personally.
know what impact it has directly, but we are in the middle of cross-current political winds, even with this virus, which is hard to imagine. But given that, then to simply open because somebody says it's okay to open, there have already been catastrophic results when that has happened. So it really behooves us to be mindful of our constituents. And I agree. I think most people at this point would be very uncomfortable coming back into a full hall or even a partially full hall without fairly stringent restrictions on that gathering.
I think it brings up a bigger picture that I'd love to hear all of you react to, which is that this idea of cross purposes in political environment as well as a disease, this is not unprecedented. And I think that it's very easy for us to get lost in the myopic view of what's happening right in front of us. But the reality is this has happened throughout centuries. And how have the arts responded historically? I believe this group of people here is uniquely positioned to discuss that. So can you talk towards the point of how the arts has survived and why it has survived? And again, reiterating why it is so important that we do what we do.
One is the composer Guillaume Machaut, who, when the plague came, shut himself up in his house famously and didn't emerge for 2 months. He got a lot of composing done. So there was a lot of music that happened as a result, but he was deprived contact with most of his colleagues and anybody who meant anything to him outside of his immediate family. We're going through something akin to that right now as we socially distance with each other, maybe not as extreme, but the same requirement really has been given to all of us to not infect other people, to stay distant, to make sure that we stay well, that those who live with us stay well. So that's one way of dealing with a pandemic as an artist. You try to make sure that nothing bad happens to you so that you can actually continue to produce your art somehow, and so that people can actually continue to enjoy it.
Gifts which we receive in the arts is that art does not run away from the human condition. So art doesn't run away from death or illness. And certainly another example of that are many texts that come out of, especially earlier times in plague and in war times. I think of some of the source materials for some of the cantatas, especially some of the chorales, which don't blink an eye in the face of massive human tragedy. And I think, and I wouldn't want to get into a cultural war, but I do think that it is perhaps sometimes a weakness in some examples of popular culture that there's a desire to move away from fundamental human condition, and it is one of the gifts, I think, again, that we bring into this possibility. I feel that one of the gifts perhaps that will come out of this is that there will be art that comes out of this pandemic also, whether it be musical art or visual art or theater or other forms that will come out. So I think we live through it and we don't try to duck it.
Yeah, I agree. I think I agree what both you said so eloquently. I think art is part of what humans are, and that is not what's at play anyway for the mid to long term. What's at play is in our situation right now is what's going to happen in the short term in Houston, and there's a real, just to put a little twist on it, which is not, I'm not a pessimistic person, but just for the sake of discussion, kind of what happens if the Houston Symphony has to fold because they have a huge payroll that now they don't have any income coming in, and they may not be able to do that for years. What happens if we can't perform because somebody gets sick in September at the Collin Theater and then they shut down the venue for a month and a half? Again, what happens if the Houston Grand Opera can't do it, and then our musicians that we share are becoming real estate agent and bank tellers and Starbucks baristas? And what if Mercury at the end of this has the size, the amount of concerts that we were 15 years ago. Well, 15 years ago, I was 15 years younger. I mean, I'm not sure that I'm up for building up 20 years of organization. And so there is, art, I believe is not at stake. I think that, you can flip it around and say there's much more people listening to Spotify classical music now than they were 3 months ago. And there's maybe a way that, we all evolve because we now are more doing video contents and reaching more people that way. But there's a worry on the short time structure of this art community in Houston. And I think the three of us are among the most best placed to weather this. A lot of it's because of our size and our model, but it's really worrisome. And I say the arts, but I could go to all the other industries in Houston with the energy crisis that we're living as well. So it's gonna be it's gonna be an interesting next year. But so for now, several years we've really developed and invested into a multimedia type performance where we don't just do a concert with musicians on stage, but we try to add more technological and visual element to it. And so we've been doing one or twice of these every year for the last 5-6 years. It's been one of the most fun thing for me because I love the stage. I love being I love being conducting in front of an orchestra, but I love this the stagecraft. And so this year we did the second concert of our cycle of Schubert song cycle, Winterreise, in collaboration with Nicholas Tan. And so it's set like an opera, but there's visual, because it's a cycle, there's really one singer, and we have a dancer, and we have a set and some projection and so on. But so one of the movement, Winterreise, is the story of this man kind of leaving his lover and ultimately kind of experiencing all these different sides of pain and ultimately resolving it. But one of the few is actually Dream of Spring, so which refers to the month of May, and it's a song about hope. And the singer says, "Oh, I see outside that now it's not winter anymore." And then he reminds himself, but the crows come back and I feel this way, and then he goes back again. So he's all by himself looking outside for the hope of spring. Why I moved to this kind of multimedia platform. I mean, the answer is simple in a way that it's not new. I mean, Baroque music, we often say that was born with opera, and so multimedia production dates from forever. But as more of an instrumental organization, we don't do it as much, and so it's a way for Mercury to include operatic type production, but yet that are not necessarily operas, because operas in the music that we perform, Baroque and classical mostly, are grand affairs, and this is not where we sit. We are not a grand opera. We have the grand opera for that here in Houston. So it's a way to do opera, to do multimedia things, and I'm also always interested with technology, craft with theater. But so it's to be part of the evolution of the concert experience. Really, that's what it is. And there's nothing new about it, but we're just glad to be among the ones that do it, and we actually pay quite a bit of attention to it.
Rick, I know you're coming at this from a different vantage point, which is actually equally as exciting and important for us to hear, because while you don't have the video library of it, what you're doing, and when we think about the third coast of Houston, in the nation, and where can you find authentic Bach? There are very few places where that is the focus. So can you talk towards that and the mission of Bach Society?
Yeah, there are very few places in the country where that is really inspired by Leipzig and the practice in Leipzig, either during Bach's time or following Bach's time, which is to have the opportunity to hear the cantatas and these other works in historic context. So in our own way, we actually do multimedia, because when you're combining all these various elements, you are creating a multi-sensory production. Production is maybe a little bit too crass, but I'll use the word right now. I think those of us who engage in this, in fact, it's going to be it's been put off 2 years, but in Leipzig this summer, there was going to be a gathering of groups from across the world, actually, who do Bach kind of in the context that we do. It's not a large group, but it certainly is a fairly passionate group as it exists. So, yeah, I think our mission is to not only bring Bach, but certainly Bach, in especially the vocal cantatas and oratorios and passions and so forth, to life. Also to hear the organ works. You know, the organ at Christ the King Church is an astonishingly fine instrument for Bach, and Buxtehude and Böhm and, you know, some of the other folks who were in the mix. So it gives us, you know, tremendous pleasure to bring that to a wider community. It is the singular focus of the group. We're also exploring right now, though, music in the Americas in the time of Bach, which is one of my new games since moving to Houston, because we're closer to where some of those sources were. So thank heavens that Houston is here, that Houston supports this, that Houston supports all our organizations, and really is a growing early music scene. I certainly, if I can dovetail back, I don't mean to shift the focus, but to going back to what Antoine was saying about concern for our artists, that they not find themselves needing to take so many other jobs that they're doing things that take away from their time to practice. And certainly one of the things, even in just the few years since I've moved here, and this is so profoundly due to a number of our organizations able to offer significant employment. And we have a body of early players in the city that is just astonishing. It's rare on the American scene still. And I think we truly are a third coast in that we can produce, you know, amazing things right here from our own community. It's exciting to see it. So I hope that this doesn't get in that way. I hope that we can find ways to be creative, to keep employing our artists, to keep our arts relevant and alive and tied to the time we're in, and that is both challenging and exciting.
So, I mean, we are operating with different scenarios. Scenario number one would be kind of, we can do more or less what we can do because there has been a real a medical solution and a real shift in the thinking. Solution two is, scenario two is all kind of in the middle. Are we becoming a media company and we start developing documentary seasons? So next season is documentary about Rick and Matthews and musicians and composers, and, you know, and or are we just finding different venues? Are we performing without audience, but we're just streaming? And so it kind of goes through all over the place. I mean, we're starting to try to boil this down, but it's hard because there's no real deadline. You know, we don't have to decide, and so there's these different things that are pulling against each other. Why should we decide now? Well, but you know, if we don't decide now, it's going to be harder down the line. And the third is, you know, the third scenario is, well, we hibernate for a year. You know, we don't know. There's always risk. You know, again, one case in a concert hall in Houston or in a church in Houston could really derail all the plans that we've been working hard. So is it better for the midterm life of the organization to just stay home and say, we're going to write this one in a different way? And so that's what's going in my head at, you know, between 6 a.m. and 6 a.m. the next day. there is no, we're not there, we're not at decision plane yet, but we really are working on scenarios, and some of them are getting more serious at this time.
Antoine, that was fantastic. You hit on pretty much every point that I've heard addressed in the webinars that I've been attending. Do you go dark for a year? Do you reinvent? And then the reality of every news conference that becomes available on a day-to-day basis could it change your entire paradigm as well as a diagnosis. So yeah, yes, very well spoken. Rick, have you contemplated this in your programming? I think you alluded to that.
We're usually the last group in town who announces our program, and that's coming out now very shortly. But so we've been putting the final pieces in. Every piece that we are looking at for next season is something which may happen live or may happen semi-live, which we partially stream, partially present, or be something which is simply seen on YouTube or on Facebook or something like that. Everything that we're looking at has to function in any of those settings, and so that to me is the critical thing. I continue to be concerned about, and I'm sorry I sound like a broken record, but I continue to be very concerned about the health of the singers and our use of the singers and where and how that plays out. So I'm probably choosing perhaps more things that are done by smaller groupings more effectively, and in whatever form that takes. So those are the challenges. We're trying to keep absolute flexibility in the programming, but we don't want people to look and say, well, there's nothing happening. We're just, I don't think it's at the extreme point where we should just simply say, forget it.
My thoughts are very much in line with both Rick's and Antoine's. You have to have some contingency plans in place, and unfortunately, the minute you decide to go with one, you may have to contemplate a different one, just because of what happens in the meantime. The key is going to be flexibility. We may have announced a season a couple of months ago, but it may not happen in exactly the way that we put on paper or put on our website. It's too early to tell, and we are at work on the various possible scenarios. Suffice it to say that programming decisions this season, I think for the next 12 months, are all going to be contingent and more inherently flexible than they might be in an otherwise normal season. One quick reflection, Houston's always been an entrepreneurial town. It may be our shared history as the frontier, and there may be some of that mentality that still lingers here, enough to make us more collaborative than we might otherwise be. But early music, that is to say, music on period instruments, is still a relatively recent phenomenon in Texas. It really only seriously got going in Houston, at least in this area, about 20, 25 years ago, and became professionalized sort of more recently than that. And the fact that we share a nucleus of players and singers in this town who are interested in this kind of music means that I think there's more reasons for us to be collaborative, to exchange ideas, to get on the same page about a lot of stuff. It just makes sense.
I grew up in the upper Midwest, which has its own struggles with the economy and with the arts. And then, of course, lived for quite a few years in New York. And New York, as you alluded to, Kathleen, is very, very different than Houston. I loved New York, but it's a very different animal, and it's its own world. I've never, though, before lived in a boom town, and one of the things that really struck me when I came to Houston was that this is, as everyone keeps alluding to, this is a kingdom town. This is just bursting at the seams, and amazing resources and amazing interest level, and one of our board members is this marvelous, fantastic, tall, lanky Texas oil guy, and I just, before I moved here, this is not who I connected with Bach, but here we are. So I think Houston being a boom town is, in my understanding, makes it a very exciting place to be an artist and to be working with an artistic group and groups, and also just the fact that we're in this all together.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting to say, but the fact that Houston's been really a thriving economical place and growth in population in the time that I've been here, and you know, a culture of entrepreneurship, as Matthew said, and of kind of accepting new ideas easily. I think it's a good thing. I don't, you know, my professional life has been mostly here in Houston, so I can't compare it. But to me, this is normal though, and I would say that it probably has to do with leadership. I mean, there is few things here. I mean, Matthew and we've known each other for almost 20, probably almost 25 years now. And we like to talk to each other and we support each other. And I know Rick for as long as he's been here. And there is a stability of leadership in this city that perhaps helps, because I know Patrick Summers at the Opera, and I know people at Da Camera, Houston Symphony. I mean, they've been the same people around, and we're just decent to each other. And when we need each other, we're there for each other. I don't know. It's not even a question. It's the culture. It's the culture of this arts community really at large. I really cannot think right now of anybody that won't take a phone call from me and actually want to help me. So and so perhaps the thing is culture, but also it's leadership. It's the fact that we are here. It's the fact that the people that are in charge have a mind of that, and it sets a culture. Well, maybe I can add one thing. I just want to thank you guys at Ars Lyrica for, you know, you've been doing a lot of different, a whole lot actually. It's been hard to keep track of your different brands that you're putting out there, but I have, you know, being part of it for a small part, I've enjoyed them just more anonymously on Facebook as well. But it's been fun for you to take the leadership to kind of do things. I enjoyed your content.